Those eggs are garbage. You know that, right? The man loading crates behind Crestfield Market said it without slowing down. He had seen the 18-year-old climb into the dumpster, seen him pulling out cracked duck eggs one by one, checking each one with both hands like it was something worth checking. Malik Webb did not answer him. He was holding the third egg, pale blue-green, hairline fracture running along the side, and it was not cold. Not the way the others were cold. Something inside it was still doing something, and he could feel it. And he was not going to put it down because a stranger told him it was garbage. He placed it carefully in his jacket pocket. He kept going. 400 cracked eggs. No home. No plan. Just a feeling in his hands that said, not yet. Malik had been sleeping under the back overhang of the Crestfield storage warehouse for 11 weeks by the time November arrived. The overhang was not much, a corrugated metal roof that extended maybe 6 feet out from the warehouse wall, just wide enough for a sleeping bag and a duffel bag, and a person who had learned not to take up more space than necessary. The wall faced north, which was bad for wind, but the loading dock next to it ran a heating vent that pushed warm air out at ground level until about 2 in the morning, which was good for survival. He was 18 years old. He had been 18 for exactly 3 months and 4 days, which was relevant because the system that had been managing his life since he was 15, the foster placements, the temporary housing referrals, the caseworker check-ins, had concluded its interest in him on his 18th birthday with the administrative efficiency of a door closing. There had been paperwork. There had been a final meeting with a woman whose name he had already forgotten, who gave him a folder of resources and shook his hand and wished him luck. The folder had been useful for about 2 weeks. The luck had not materialized in any form he could identify. His mother had died when he was 15, a fact he carried the way people carried old injuries, not always at the front of his awareness, but present in the way he went still when something felt precarious. His father had not been part of the picture for long enough that his absence had its own particular quality, less like a loss and more like a room he had never been allowed to enter. 3 years in the foster system had not replaced either of those things. They had given him a different education, which was the education of paying close attention to people who had the authority to determine where he slept. He had come to Crestfield because a man at the last shelter told him the town had a day labor office that paid same day, and that the streets were quieter than the city. Both things turned out to be true. The day labor work had connected him to Mr. Hale's grocery, where he had been doing morning stocking and delivery unloading for 6 weeks, enough hours to eat and to keep the duffel bag supplied with the basics. The streets were indeed quieter, which meant that when people noticed him, they noticed him more specifically. In a city, a young black man without an address was invisible by volume. In Crestfield, he was a particular person who slept behind the warehouse on Elm, and people knew it, and they had opinions about it that ranged from genuine kindness to a particular kind of studied non-acknowledgement that was its own statement. He did not think about this too much. Thinking about it was not useful. What was useful was the morning routine, which he executed with the consistency of someone who understood that routine was the scaffolding keeping everything else from collapsing. Up at 5:15, fold the sleeping bag, check the duffel, walk the 4 blocks to Crestfield Market's back lot, where the loading dock light ran all night and the dumpster had a step rail he could stand on. He had been checking that dumpster every morning for 6 weeks because the market threw away things that still had value, and he had learned from necessity to see value in things that had been officially reclassified as waste. He had taken cardboard from it, which he used as insulation under the sleeping bag on the coldest nights. He had taken produce, bruised apples, slightly soft bell peppers, the outer leaves of cabbages stripped for display. None of it was what anyone would choose if they had a full range of choices. Malik had a narrow range of choices, and he had stopped measuring what he had against what he would prefer because that measurement produced nothing actionable. The morning he found the eggs was a Monday in the 2nd week of November. He had not slept well. The temperature had dropped below freezing for the first time that season, and the heating vent at the warehouse had cut off earlier than usual, sometime around midnight. which meant the last 5 hours before his alarm had been spent in a state closer to endurance than rest. He was at the market dumpster at 5:40 instead of the usual 5:45. The lid was propped open, which meant a recent delivery had produced waste. He climbed onto the step rail and looked in. 7 wooden egg crates stacked in the first layer. He reached for the nearest one and looked inside. Duck eggs. Large, pale blue-green. The kind that Crestfield Market stocked in small quantities for customers who specifically wanted them. Pekin duck eggs, sourced from a farm supplier 2 counties over. He knew them by sight because he had unloaded them twice at Mr. Hale's on days when a specialty order came in, and Mr. Hale had told him what they were and what they cost, which was more per dozen than Malloch spent on food in a week. They were cracked. That was why they were here. Not all of them, and not all in the same way. Some had hairline fractures along the long axis of the shell. Some had larger breaks where a corner of the crate had compressed against the egg under the weight of stacking. The kind of damage that happened in transit, when a shipment got handled roughly or loaded wrong, and that a market could not sell and therefore disposed of without ceremony. Malloch picked up the first egg, cold in the specific, settled way of something that had been refrigerated long enough that cold was its natural state now. He set it back and picked up the second, also cold. The third egg he picked up was not cold. He stood on the step rail in the November dark and held it in both hands. Not warm, exactly. Not the warmth of something living in the obvious sense. It was the warmth of something that had not yet finished losing heat, which was different, and he knew it was different because he had spent enough nights in the cold to understand the distinction between a thing that was definitively cold and a thing that was still in the process of becoming cold. One was a fact. The other was a condition that had not yet resolved. He held the egg and did not move for a while. He had never incubated eggs. He had never raised animals of any kind. What he knew about hatching came from a vague, general awareness that it involved heat and time, which was not much of a knowledge base. What he had, instead of knowledge, was the specific understanding that the egg in his hands had not yet committed to being dead, and that he did not think it was his place to make that commitment on its behalf before he had more information. He put the egg carefully in the inner pocket of his jacket, where his body heat would keep it from losing more ground, and started going through the crates. He worked for 45 minutes. The small LED flashlight he kept on his person, found in the parking lot of the day labor office, kept since because having light when you needed light was not a small thing, gave him enough illumination to work by. He tested each egg the same way. Both hands, full contact, attention on the temperature. Most were cold in the way of finality, of a thing that had been in refrigeration long enough that whatever warmth it carried was genuinely gone. He set those back. But not all of them. Working through all 7 crates, he found 92 eggs that were not cold in that final way. Not warm, not confirmed as anything, but not finished losing heat either. He stacked them carefully in a produce box he found at the bottom of the dumpster. A low, flat wooden crate with structural integrity, which he lined with loose straw that had come in with an earlier delivery. The straw cushioned the eggs against the wood. He arranged them in a single layer as much as the dimensions allowed, the rest nested at angles that kept them from rolling. He climbed down from the step rail. He stood in the loading dock light with the produce box and looked at it. 92 pale blue-green duck eggs in a wooden box lined with straw at 5:58 in the morning in November in a parking lot in Crestfield, Missouri. He was 18 years old and homeless, and standing in below-freezing air with a box of cracked eggs that everyone who knew anything about eggs would tell him were not worth carrying. He picked up the box and walked back toward the warehouse overhang. The walk was 4 blocks. He took it at a pace that kept the box level, stepping around the sections of sidewalk where the concrete had heaved from tree roots, slowing at the curb cuts where the angle would tip the box forward. At the overhang, he set the box down on the piece of cardboard he used as a ground cover. He thought about what he needed. Heat was the primary thing, consistent heat, the kind that did not drop at midnight when a vent shut off. He did not have consistent heat. What he had was a 40-watt bulb in the clip light he used for reading, which ran off a heavy-duty extension cord drawing from the warehouse's outdoor outlet, an arrangement the warehouse owner did not know about and that Malak understood was provisional at best. He set up the clip light over the box and arranged the sleeping bag around 3 sides of it to hold the heat in, leaving the top partially open for air. He checked the egg from his jacket pocket, still not cold, and placed it back with the others. Then he wrote on the back of a grocery receipt, November, 92 eggs. One was warm when I found it. All 92 not cold. Clip light running. We'll know more in a week. He folded the receipt and put it in the duffel. He sat against the warehouse wall with his knees up and watched the clip light's glow reflect off the pale shells and waited for the morning to come in. Dolores Whitman opened her laundromat at 7 every morning, and on the Tuesday after Malak found the eggs, she was pulling up the security gate when she saw him adjusting something under the overhang across the street. She watched for a moment, then crossed over. He was setting the produce box against the warehouse wall, repositioning the clip light above it, tucking the sleeping bag around 3 sides with the careful attention of someone building something that needed to hold. Dolores asked him what he was doing. Malak told her. She stood in the cold looking at the box of cracked duck eggs, then looked at him, then looked at the box again. She said she had never heard of anyone trying to hatch dumpster eggs. Malak said he hadn't either, but that some of them were still warm when he found them, so he was going to find out what that meant. Dolores went back to her laundromat. By noon, everyone on the block knew. The story moved through Crestfield the way stories moved through small towns, not maliciously, but thoroughly. Pete Garner mentioned it to 2 customers at his diner over the lunch hour. The version that circulated was accurate in its basic facts and imprecise in its interpretation. A homeless young black man had pulled cracked duck eggs out of the dumpster behind Crestfield Market and was trying to hatch them under a clip light behind the warehouse on Elm. The response was not cruel. It was the laughter of people who knew, with the confidence of common sense, that this was not going to work. Cracked eggs did not hatch. Everyone knew that. The young man clearly did not, which was the part that people found sad and a little absurd. Malak was not at the overhang when most of this was happening. He was at the public library in the afternoon, the only place in Crestfield he could go that required nothing of him except silence and a library card, both of which he had. He went to the reference desk and asked the librarian, a woman named Carol Briggs, who had been at that desk for 19 years, whether she had anything on incubating duck eggs. Carol found him 3 documents: a 1987 Extension Service pamphlet on waterfowl production, a university press guide to backyard duck keeping from 1994, and a spiral-bound manual on hatching waterfowl that a discontinued 4-H program had donated, which covered incubation in more technical detail than the other 2. She set them on the table by the window and told him she would be at the desk if he had questions. Malak read all 3. He wrote on the back of another grocery receipt because he had run out of the first one. Duck eggs needed 28 days. Temperature at egg level should hold at 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity between 55 and 65% for the first 25 days, higher in the final 3. Turn the eggs 3 times a day, an odd number of turns so the egg ended each day on the opposite side from where it started. Candle at day 7 and day 14 to check development. He read the section on cracked eggs twice because the 3 sources did not agree. The oldest pamphlet said cracked eggs should not be incubated, full stop. The 1994 guide said minor surface cracks could sometimes be sealed with beeswax, and the egg incubated with lower hatch rates than intact eggs. The 4-H manual was the most specific. Eggs with the membrane intact beneath the crack could sometimes hatch even without sealing, particularly if the crack was superficial and the shell had enough integrity to hold the internal pressure changes of development. The membrane was the real barrier, not the shell. He wrote, "Seal hairline cracks. Do not seal deep cracks where membrane is broken. Find wax. Add humidity pan to setup. critical for waterfowl. He thanked Carol when he returned the materials. She asked if he was hatching ducks. He said he was trying to. She told him her neighbor hatched chickens and swore the first candling told you everything you needed to know. Malik said he was planning to candle on day 7. She wrote down the relevant page numbers from the manuals on a slip of paper and handed it to him, saying the library was closed Saturdays and he might want these for reference. Malik took the slip and put it in his pocket with the receipts. He stopped at the hardware store on the way back and bought a small ceiling candle, beeswax adjacent, which the 4-H manual had listed as acceptable. He also found a shallow aluminum tray in the dumpster behind the laundromat, which he cleaned and filled with water and set inside the sleeping bag walls beside the produce box to add humidity to the enclosed space. That evening, he melted wax with his lighter and dripped it across the hairline cracks with the point of a toothpick, marking each sealed egg with a small pencil X on the broad end. 27 of the 92 received wax sealing by the time he finished. He turned the eggs morning, noon, and evening. He did not miss a turn. That was how the first week went. Malik turned the eggs and went to work at Mr. Hale's and came to the library twice more to reread the sections he had marked. The town talked about him in the way the town talked about things it had already decided. The decision was uniform. The eggs would not hatch. Dennis Hale heard the story on Wednesday from Pete Garner, who came into the grocery for coffee supplies and mentioned it the way people mention things they expected the listener to already know. Hale was 63 years old and had run his grocery on Main Street for 22 years. He was not a man who formed opinions quickly, which was one of the things that had made him willing to hire Malik when the day labor office referred him over, at a time when some of the other businesses on the block had not been similarly willing. He listened to Pete's account and said he would look into it. He found Malik at the overhang at 4:30 after the grocery closed. He stood at the edge of the corrugated roof and looked at the produce box with the clip light and the sleeping bag walls and the water tray and the 92 eggs visible in the straw. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Malik. Hale said what he came to say directly, which was his way. He told Malik that cracked eggs required controlled incubation, a real incubator, a calibrated thermometer, proper humidity management, none of which Malik had. The clip light was not sufficient. The temperature differential between a warm night and a cold night under that overhang could compromise development even in eggs that had started viable. He was not saying this to be discouraging. He was saying it because Malik had been working for him for 6 weeks and deserved the actual information. Then Hale made his offer. He told Malik to set the eggs aside and come store his things in the back of the grocery where it would at least be dry. He would make some calls to organizations that helped young men in Malik's situation find stable housing and work training. It was a real offer, and Malik understood this, which was why it landed with the weight it had. Malik looked at the produce box. He thought about the third egg he had picked up on Monday morning. Not cold, not finished, still doing something. And about the other 91 that had registered the same quality to varying degrees. He had not yet candled any of them, which meant he had not yet confirmed what he suspected and had not yet earned the right to conclude it. He looked at Hale and asked if he could borrow the old incandescent work lamp from the storage room, the 40-watt one. Hale looked at him for a long time. Then he went inside and came back with the lamp. He handed it over without a word. Malik said thank you. Hale looked at the box one more time, then walked back to the grocery. Malik replaced the clip light with the work lamp, which ran hotter and more directionally, and adjusted the sleeping bag walls to account for the difference. He added a second water tray to improve humidity now that the heat source was stronger. He wrote on the receipt, Day 4, Hale brought the lamp. Humidity setup improved. 2 trays now. Turning schedule holding. Day 7 will tell. On the evening of Day 7, after the 6 o'clock turn, he carried the produce box to the darkest corner of the overhang and turned off the work lamp. He held his flashlight against the broad end of the first egg and turned it slowly. He was looking for an air cell at the large end and, in a viable egg at Day 7, a network of blood vessels radiating from a central dark mass. the developing embryo, visible as a branching red-orange pattern against the shell's translucence when the light was strong enough and the angle was right. 48 eggs showed him something. The air cell was visible in all 48, a clear, lighter area at the broad end, distinct from the denser internal mass. In the ones with the best shell translucence, he could see the vessel network, branching, faint, orange-red. He went through the first 3 slowly, making sure he was not projecting what he wanted to see. On the 4th and 5th, he was more certain. By the 10th, he was not doubting it. 48 out of 92. He wrote the number on a new receipt. The other 44 showed nothing, clear throughout or too opaque to read. He set them aside. 48 he placed back in the straw. He sat against the warehouse wall in the dark with the work lamp's heat against his left side and the produce box in front of him and the number in his head. 48 was not 400. It was not even 92. But he had started from a position where the expected number was 0, and 0 was not what he had. Then the problem arrived that had been building since the first day. Raymond Kowalski owned the warehouse. He was not an unreasonable man in the abstract, but he was a man who owned a building and had not given anyone permission to draw electricity from its outdoor outlet. Someone had told him the young man sleeping under his overhang had been running a lamp off that outlet for going on 2 weeks. He came on a Thursday morning at 8, when Mallock was at Mr. Hale's. He traced the extension cord from the outlet to the sleeping bag walls and the produce box and the lamp, and he was standing there when Mallock came back at noon for the midday turn. Kowalski told Mallock the electrical use was not something he could allow. Liability, insurance, the simple fact that he had not agreed to it. He said Mallock needed to clear out by morning, everything, the sleeping bag and the duffel and the eggs and the lamp. He was not cruel about it. He said it the way a man said something he had decided was necessary and was not going to negotiate on. Then he left. Mallock sat down on the cardboard ground cover and looked at the produce box. 48 eggs. Day 9 of a 28-day incubation. No electricity after tomorrow morning. Temperature dropping below 20 degrees Fahrenheit at night. Without a consistent heat source, 48 developing eggs would lose ground overnight and not recover it. He had turned down Hale's offer 5 days ago. He had chosen the eggs over the easier path, and now the easier path had different conditions attached to it. The eggs needed to move. He needed somewhere with electricity and enough ambient warmth to supplement what the lamp provided. He had until morning. That night, with no outlet available and the temperature outside falling steadily, Mallock sat on the cardboard with the produce box on his lap and the sleeping bag wrapped around both of them together. Not around him, around both of them. He pressed the box against his torso and pulled the sleeping bag tight over the whole arrangement and leaned back against the warehouse wall. His body heat was not 99.5 degrees, he knew that. But his body heat was heat, and it was consistent, and it was the only thing he had. He stayed that way through the night, adjusting the sleeping bag when it slipped, moving carefully when he needed to shift position so as not to jostle the box. He did not sleep in any meaningful sense. He watched the temperature drop and held the eggs and waited. This was the lowest point. Not because of the cold or the exhaustion or the fact that the overhang was going to be unavailable by morning, but because he was alone with 48 developing eggs on day 9 of 28, and the only warmth between them and failure was the warmth of his own body, and he could not know if that was enough. He did not know. He held them anyway. Hale arrived at 5:30 in the morning, an hour and a half before the grocery opened. He came around the corner of the warehouse and found Mallock exactly where he had been the night before, sitting against the wall, the produce box on his lap, the sleeping bag wrapped around both of them. Mallock had been awake for most of the night. His face showed it. But the box was still there, and when Hale crouched down and put his hand near the edge of the sleeping bag, he could feel that some warmth had been maintained. Hale looked at Mallock. He looked at the box. He looked at the gray November morning coming in over the rooftops. Then he said, Come inside." He led Malak through the groceries back entrance, past the stockroom shelves and the delivery area, to the corner of the storage room where the building's heating pipe ran along the baseboard before going up into the main floor. It was the warmest corner in the building. He pointed at the floor space beside the pipe and told Malak to set the box down there. He said Malak was responsible for cleanup. Then he went to start the coffee machine and left Malak alone in the storage room with the eggs and the heat. Malak set the produce box down beside the baseboard pipe. He plugged the work lamp into the storage room wall outlet and positioned it over the box at the angle that gave the most even heat distribution across the straw. He refilled the water trays and placed them back inside the sleeping bag walls to maintain humidity. He checked each egg by hand. Most still held some warmth from the night against his body. A few on the outer edges were cooler than he wanted. He rearranged those toward the center and covered the box loosely with the sleeping bag to hold the lamp's heat in. He wrote on the receipt, "Day 10, move to Hale's storage room. Baseboard heat plus lamp. Humidity trays in place. All 48 in box. Turning schedule continuing." He turned the eggs at noon and at 6. He slept on the storage room floor that night with Hale's permission, which Hale gave without being asked by leaving a folded blanket on the stockroom shelf before he locked up. Malak used the blanket and did not remark on it. The story had already been circulating for 10 days when a local reporter named Brian Solt picked it up. Solt wrote a twice-weekly column for the Crestfield Courier covering human interest items, anything that contained something unexpected. Dolores Whitman told him about Malak when he came into the laundromat on a Wednesday. Solt came to the grocery the following day, introduced himself to Hale, and asked if he could see the eggs. Hale told him that was Malak's business, not his. Solt found Malak in the storage room during the noon turn and asked his questions while Malak turned the eggs one by one, setting each one back in the straw with the same methodical care he had been using for nearly 2 weeks. Solt asked how many eggs there were. Malak told him 48 viable, from an original 92 retrieved from the market dumpster. Solt asked what Malak expected to happen. Malak said he expected to find out at day 14 whether the development he had seen at day 7 had continued. Solt asked how he knew about candling and incubation periods. Malak said the library. Solt wrote something down and left. The piece ran in the Courier 2 days later under the headline, "Homeless man tries to hatch dumpster eggs in local grocery store room." It was accurate in its facts. Its tone was the tone of something presented as a curiosity, as a thing that was probably not going to work but was interesting for the trying. By the end of the week, it had been shared beyond Crestfield. Malak read it once and put it down. He understood what the article was doing, presenting him as a figure of pathos rather than a person executing a process. He did not have strong feelings about this that he could act on, so he set it aside and continued the turning schedule. Day 14 arrived on a Sunday. He candled all 48 eggs in the storage room with the overhead light off and the work lamp unplugged, holding his flashlight against each egg in the corner where the shelving blocked the light from the small window. At day 14, development was considerably more visible than at day 7. The embryo was larger, the air cell more defined, the vessel network denser and more complex. In the most developed eggs, he could see movement, a faint internal shift as the embryo responded to the light or the warmth of his hands. 39 of the 48 showed clear, continued development. 9 showed nothing that could be confirmed. He removed the 9 and placed them aside. 39 remained. He wrote, Day 14, 39 of 48 confirmed developing. 9 removed. Lockdown day 25. Turning continues. 39. From 400 eggs in a dumpster to 92 retrieved to 48 confirmed at day 7 to 39 at day 14. Each reduction smaller than the one before. The biggest losses had come early, in the cold and the uncertainty of the first days. What remained had survived the most vulnerable period and was continuing to develop in the warmth of a grocery storage room in the second week of November. Lockdown was day 25. He stopped turning the eggs and raised the humidity by adding a third water tray and draping a damp cloth across the back edge of the produce crate. The manuals had explained the reason. In the final days, the duckling inside needed to orient itself toward the air cell and begin breaking through the internal membrane before pipping the shell. Turning interrupted that orientation. The eggs needed to be still so the animal inside could find its direction. He did not open the box after day 25 except to refill the water trays. The 3 lockdown days were the quietest of the entire process because there was genuinely nothing to do except maintain conditions and not interfere. He had been working toward this point for 25 days, and now the work was finished, and what remained would happen or not happen without his involvement. He sat on the storage room floor in the evenings after Hale closed up and reread Carol's notes about the hatching process. The duckling absorbed the remaining yolk in the final days, rotated to position its beak toward the air cell, and broke through the internal membrane with a small, hardened point on the beak called the egg tooth, a structure that existed only for this single purpose and was gone within days of hatching. Something built for one specific moment, present only when that moment required it, and gone when the moment passed. He wrote that detail in the margin of the receipt and left it without comment. Day 27. He was in the storage room at 5:50 in the morning for the temperature check when he heard it. Not a peep, not a crack, a tapping. The very small, dry sound of something inside a shell making contact with the shell from the inside. He set down the thermometer and crouched in front of the produce box and did not move. It came again. Then from a different location in the box, a second tapping, slightly stronger, slightly more irregular. 2 eggs. He could not see which ones without moving things, and he was not going to move things. He wrote on the receipt, Day 27, 5:52 a.m., first pip sounds. 2 eggs tapping, not opening, waiting. Hale arrived at 6:30. He came to the storage room first, the way he had been doing every morning for 2 weeks. He found Maylock crouched in front of the produce box, listening. Hale started to ask a question. Maylock held up one hand and pointed at the box. Hale went still. Then he came into the room fully and sat down on the floor beside Maylock. A 63-year-old man in his work slacks and flannel shirt, sitting on the concrete floor of his own storage room at 6:30 in the morning, listening to eggs that had come from a dumpster. A third tapping joined the first 2. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that would improve on what they were hearing. By 9 in the morning, a small hole was visible in one egg, barely the size of a pencil point, with a ring of hairline fractures spreading outward from it in the circular pattern the manuals called the zip. By noon, Maylock could see a bill at the pip hole of the first egg, dark and small, working at the shell with a persistence that its size did not suggest should be possible. By 3 in the afternoon, the top of the first shell was separating. At 4:17, the first duckling was out. It was wet. More wet than he had expected, the membrane still visible on the down. The animal lay on its side in the straw with its sides heaving from the effort of what it had just done. Maylock did not touch it. The manuals had been clear. The hatch effort itself was necessary for the duckling's development. A duckling helped out too early was a weaker duckling. Let it rest. Let it dry. The lamp would do the rest. He watched it for an hour. By 5, the down was beginning to dry, the pale yellow-brown color coming through as the membrane dried away. The animal could not hold its head reliably, and its legs were uncertain on the straw, but it was dry, and it was breathing, and it was in the world. A second duckling was out by 7, a third by 9. Hale had called Carol Briggs at 6, who came after the library closed and stood in the storage room doorway with her coat still on, watching. Dolores Whitman heard something from across the street and came over at 8. She stood at the door and looked at what was in the produce box and did not say anything for a long time. Then she said she owed Maylock an apology for laughing back in November. Maylock told her she had been working from what she could see, which was a man with a box of broken eggs. She said that was generous of him. He said it was just accurate. By the end of day 27, 7 ducklings were in the box, drying under the lamp and beginning to find their footing in the straw. Maylock slept on the storage room floor again that night, checking every 2 hours. New pips appeared in the dark hours. He wrote the times in the receipt margin. By the end of day 28, 21 ducklings had hatched. He waited through day 29. The remaining unhatched eggs showed no movement when he candled them. He removed them, replaced the straw, and adjusted the lamp height to account for the ducklings' growing capacity. Then he sat on the floor of the grocery storage room and looked at 21 small animals figuring out the world around them. He wrote, "Final hatch, 21 ducklings, from 400 dumpster eggs to 92 retrieved to 48 day 7 confirmed to 39 lockdown to 21 hatched. 21 over 400 equals 5.3% of initial. 21 over 39 equals 53.8% of lockdown. Both numbers are real. The second number is the one that tells you what the work was worth." He went to tell Hale the number. Hale was at the front counter doing the morning receipts. Mallock came out of the storage room and said 21. Hale set down his pen. He asked 21 out of how many at lockdown? Mallock said 39. Hale asked 39 from what he had originally found. Mallock said 92 retrieved from the dumpster, from a starting count of close to 400 in the crates. Hale looked at him across the counter. Then he said, "I almost told you to throw those eggs away." Mallock said he knew. Hale said, "I was wrong about what they were." Mallock said, "You were working from what you could see. What you could see was cracked eggs in a dumpster." Hale picked his pen back up. He told Mallock there was a woman named Sandra Hayes who ran the county's Young Adult Support Center. He said he had called her last week to tell her about Mallock, not because of the newspaper article, but because he thought she should know that a young man with this particular quality of follow-through existed in Crestfield and did not have anywhere stable to land. He said Sandra was coming on Friday at 2, if Mallock could be there. Mallock stood at the counter and thought about what it meant that Hale had made that call before the hatch, not after. That he had not waited to see if the eggs worked before deciding Mallock was worth the call. He thought that said something about Hale that the man would not have said about himself. He told Hale he would be there at 2. Sandra Hayes came on Friday. She was a practical woman who asked direct questions and listened to the full answer before responding. She asked about Mallock's current situation, his work history with Hale, what he knew how to do and what he wanted to learn next. Mallock answered accurately and without embellishment. She told him about a transitional housing unit the center ran for young adults, a room available, a stable address, a path back to eligibility for the programs that had aged him out at 18. She told him about a vocational program in agricultural trades, accepting applications for the spring cohort. She said the duck situation was interesting to her not as a story, but as evidence of a particular kind of capacity, the capacity to identify a viable possibility inside something everyone else had written off, and to execute a process over time with insufficient resources and no guarantee of outcome. Mallock listened to her describe it and recognized what she was naming without having had a name for it himself. He said he was interested in the housing and the program. She said she would send the paperwork. He moved into the transitional housing unit in December. The 21 ducklings moved with him, in the produce box, in Hale's truck, to the small outbuilding behind the center that Sandra had arranged permission to use. He built a proper pen from lumber the center had in storage. He continued the feeding and watering schedule with the same attention he had given everything since November. Consistent, without requiring the outcome to justify itself before the work was done. In the spring, 19 ducks reached maturity. 2 losses in the first month, both in the first week, the kind that happened regardless of management. 19 from 21. 19 from 400 cracked eggs in a dumpster on a Monday morning in November. A chef at a restaurant in the county seat had read the Courier article and called Sandra's center in March asking about the ducks. He came and looked at the birds and the pen setup and the feed records Malik kept in a proper notebook by then, and he offered to buy the processed birds at a specialty price. Malik negotiated the per-bird rate directly, and they agreed on terms. On the day the first sale was completed, Hale stopped by the outbuilding and stood at the pen fence watching the ducks move through the April morning light. He said he still thought about that night he found Malok on the floor with the sleeping bag around himself and the egg box both. Malok said he thought about it too sometimes. Hale said, "What do you think about when you think about it?" Malok said he thought about the fact that the only difference between that night and giving up was the decision to hold on until morning. That was all it was. One more night. Hale nodded and watched the ducks for a while longer. Then he said he had to get back to open the store, and he shook Malok's hand and he left. Malok stood at the fence alone in the April light. 19 ducks, from 400 cracked eggs in a dumpster. He took the grocery receipt out of his shirt pocket, the original one, the first one he had written on in November, which he had kept folded there since the morning he moved into the housing unit, and read the last line he had written on it. One of them was not cold. I checked before I concluded. That was all. He folded it back up and put it in his pocket. He went to start the morning feed. There is something in this story that I think a lot of us already know, even if we have not had words for it yet. Most of the things we write off, in our own lives, in the people around us, in the situations we walk past every day, we write them off not because we checked and confirmed they were finished, but because they looked finished from the outside. Cracked, past the point of return, not worth the trouble of a closer look. Malik did not have superior knowledge. He did not have equipment or training or any advantage that the people who laughed at him did not also have access to. What he had was the decision to hold something in his hands before he decided what it was, to feel for warmth before he called it cold. That decision cost him nothing except the willingness to be wrong about what he was looking at. If you are watching this right now and there is something in your life that everyone, maybe even you, has already classified as over, as broken, as not worth the effort, I want to ask you to pick it up one more time. Not because it will definitely work out. Some things really are finished, and checking will confirm that. And that is also valuable information. But because you do not actually know yet, and not knowing is not the same as the answer being no. If this story reached you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop your city in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you are watching from. And if you have ever held on to something everyone else had already written off, tell me what happened. Every single comment gets read.